Hey y'all! Today on All You Can Spice, we're going to be making a Creole classic, some red beans and rice. Now, I grew up in the New Orleans area and I've had plenty of different types of red beans and rice, but today we're going to make the version that I grew up eating and cooking with my grandma. So here's our ingredients for the red beans and rice, mostly in order of how we're going to cook it. We have Miss Savoy's sliced pickled pork, delicious. We have Richard's andouille smoked sausage. We have 2 onions, 1 green bell pepper, 3 stalks of celery, some minced garlic, some famous Camellia New Orleans red beans, right, red kidney beans, and Emeril's chicken stock, 2 bay leaves, our Creole seasoning, and some kosher salt. The first thing you are going to want to do is soak your red beans. You can do it for 5 hours, 8 hours. Some people do it overnight, but then you would have to cook the beans, kind of early in the morning. So 8 hours, 5 to 8 hours is a good bet. Make sure before you soak your beans to rinse them and sort through them. I've never found a pebble, and I've cooked red beans and rice so many times in my life. It might just be that Camellia beans is superb in weeding them out, but apparently a pebble can sneak into the beans, and you really don't want to be biting down on that and breaking a tooth. So sort through the beans, make sure there's no rocks, and rinse them really well before you soak them. You want to put the red beans in a big bowl and fill it up with water. I filled the water up to here, and the beans have absorbed this much. So fill it up with a lot of water. Do extra than you'll need because you don't want the beans to suck up that water and then any rise above it and be dried out. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to cut up our pickled pork into chunks, big chunks, because it's going to end up falling apart by the end of the cooking process. And then our andouille sausage we're going to split in half and then cut 1-inch pieces. And then we're going to brown both of them. First the pickled pork, then the sausage. It doesn't really matter what order. We're going to chop our onions, bell peppers, and celery. We're going to saute them together in the juices of the sausage and the pickled pork. And then once the onions are almost done, we're going to add our garlic, and then we'll add everything else. We're going to be cooking the red beans in this 8-quart Dutch oven, which is just the best pot. I mean, I cook pretty much everything in it. They're amazing. They don't burn things as easily. They give the equal temperature throughout. It's a really amazing cooking vessel. And we are going to put our heat to high to brown our sausage and pork. Here's our pickled pork. See, they're in pretty big chunks. And we're going to brown them, and then they will fall apart by the end of the cooking process, and that's one of the ways you know that it's done. You can trim off the excess fat if you want. Some people may like it. I find that the fat on pickled pork is kind of extra slimy, so I like to take any excess off. Next, we're going to add some olive oil, just a little bit. You're going to want to swirl that oil around the pot and then drop in your pickled pork. You're going to want to brown that pickled pork about a minute on each side. And this will depend on the heat that your stove gives off and how hot your pot is getting. So you just have to pay attention, but you want a nice brown color that's not burnt. The browning gives the meat some really good flavor. All right, so you see we have some nice browning there. So then you want to split your andouille sausage in half like this. And then we're going to cut about 1-inch pieces. You can also split these again and then cut them into forks, and they have like little bites of sausage in every bite. That's good too, so it's whatever your preference. Alright, so the tops and bottoms of our pickled pork is browned, so now we're browning the sides. And your andouille is going to be in chunks like this. And it can be 1/2 inch or 1 inch. You can make it however big you want. Alright, I'd say the pickled pork is done browning. It's got some nice color. Just transfer that to a plate. Then with the heat still on high, add your sausage. Give it a good stir. Alright, I've let them cook for about a minute. Give it a good stir. So one thing I hear from people when I give them one of my recipes is that they're afraid to cook on high heat. But if you want to brown something, if you want to cook quickly, you can use high heat. You just need the right equipment and you need to be paying attention. If you get a Dutch oven or a thicker pot, it's much easier to cook things on high heat. It's much easier to control. So don't be afraid of the high heat, just make sure you're paying attention. Alright, we're going to trim the ends off of our celery. Check on our sausage. Another thing you want to do, of course, with the Dutch oven, if you're going to be touching the bottom, got to use wooden utensils or else you'll scrape it all up. And then you can use a flat piece like this to scrape any of the brown bits on the bottom. Scrape them while they're brown and it gives your dish good flavor. If you don't scrape them, they're going to turn into black bits and then it's going to make your dish taste like chalk. Or it can anyway. And then voila, you have chopped celery. Alright, I think our sausage is nice and brown. We can go ahead and take that out the pot. And then we're going to add our onions, bell pepper, and celery. Cook it in those juices. Plus a little bit of extra olive oil. Then you want to chop your bell pepper into strips like this, and then chop them. Then you have chopped bell pepper. Then we're going to chop our onions. And when you're chopping onions, if you don't already know, keep the roots on it like this. Don't chop the root end off because it does two things. One, it helps you not cry as much. The root is where you will get a lot of those gases that'll make you cry. And the root holds the onion together while you're chopping it. So it's much easier and it doesn't fall apart. And voila! It is chopped. Alright y'all, here we have the New Orleans Trinity. Celery, bell pepper, and onions. We put it in almost all of our food here, and it's delicious. We're going to go ahead and add a little bit of olive oil to that sausage and pulled pork grease. Then we're going to put these babies in. Alright, once it's in, give it a nice stir. And Paul Prudhomme said that when you're cooking, the smartest thing to do is to season every step. Now, this dish isn't going to need that much salt because of the sausage and the pulled pork. The pulled pork's going to add some sodium. That sausage is going to add some salt. So we won't need to add too much. But I will salt, some kosher salt, the onions, bell pepper, and celery, just to make sure that they're nice and seasoned. Alright, and if you are wondering, yes, I still have my heat on high. I'll be standing over the onions, stirring them every now and again, making sure they don't get burned. And if necessary, once they become more cooked, I probably will put the heat down to medium-high. Right? Because once they're cooked, then they tend to be able to burn more easily. But we want the onions to be translucent. Right? That's the word my grandma always used. Gotta cook them until the onions are translucent. Right until you can see a little bit. She also said until the onions are sweating. Right? That's what her dad used to say. We're not going to add the garlic until the onions are almost done because the garlic can burn much easier than any of these ingredients. And it doesn't need to be cooked that much. Also, once the onions are in there for a little bit, they will break up anything that's on the bottom. So all those brown bits that were on the bottom that you've been saving for flavor, now they're gonna make the onions taste even better. See that brown color? Another really important thing when you're cooking your red beans and rice is to have your sous chefs. But I've been letting the onions sit for maybe 2-3 minutes. Give them a nice stir. Remember, you don't want to be constantly stirring, or else they're not going to cook how they should. You can let them cook. Another thing I forgot to mention. So I use pickled pulled pork because that's what my grandma used, and it's delicious. It's tender and it's tasty, but the traditional thing to use in red beans is ham hock, right? A big old chunk of ham. This was because ham used to be traditionally a Sunday dish. Red beans and rice was always a Monday dish. I mean, my family, we never strictly made red beans and rice on Mondays, but it was tradition around New Orleans. So we use pickled pork. A lot of people use ham hock or some kind of big old chunk of pork or ham. A lot of people use tasso. And now for some history about red beans and rice. So red beans and rice is a Creole dish, right? It comes from New Orleans. And first of all, Creole, everybody gets into arguments about what it means. Literally, Creole comes from the Spanish, Portuguese word for criollo, and it just means of the New World. So really, we're all of the New World, and Creole has taken on different definitions throughout history. At one point, it was referred to just the French, right? The Creole French, before the Louisiana Purchase, and after the Louisiana Purchase. That's how they differentiated themselves between the new Americans that moved in and formed businesses. So you had those Creoles. But then Creoles also meant free people of color at one point. At one time, it was only the rich French and Spanish descendants that said you can call yourself Creole. So pretty much every single group of people has called themselves Creole at one point. But the first time it was used was like in Central America, and it was referring to livestock that was born in the New World instead of in the Old World of Europe. So it's a Creole dish, right? But red beans and rice is a Caribbean dish, right? You think of all the bean dishes of the Caribbean and Central and South America, right? Huge focus on beans because it's a superfood, right? It's cheap, it's packed full of protein. You find bean dishes all over the Caribbean. And New Orleans has, for hundreds of years been a Caribbean city because we've been a big port city at the mouth of the Mississippi River on the Gulf of Mexico. I mean, we had more relationships, trading relationships with the Caribbean and with Spanish colonies than we did with America for a long time. So a lot of our food is influenced that way, right? Red beans and rice was influenced by the French, by the Spanish, and by Africans in the city, right? It has been made 1,000 different ways and more. Everyone has their own version of it. Some versions that you see on the internet are pretty funny and crazy, but today we're making a pretty traditional red beans and rice. Now we're going to give it another stir, and we can put it down to medium-high heat. And now we can add our garlic, because the onions, as you can see, are starting to become translucent, right? They're starting to become see-through. We're going to put in about 2 teaspoons of minced garlic. Stir that in really well. Alright, so that garlic isn't going to need that long to cook. After we add the garlic, you can go ahead and drain your red beans. You can save the water and add to it. I usually just get new water in case there's any leftover dirt after rinsing the beans. Alright y'all, I think our Trinity plus garlic has some good color. Onions are translucent, they have some nice brown coloring to them. The bell pepper and celery are nice and soft. Looking good. We can go ahead and add the beans that are drained. Go ahead and add our beans, our meat, 2 quarts of chicken stock, and 2 cups of water. Give everything a good stir. Use your wooden utensil and scrape any brown bits off the bottom. Yum, 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 yum. Add your 2 bay leaves. And then you're going to bring the pot up to a boil. So I have it on high. I'm gonna wait for it to come to a boil before we add the salt and the seasoning. The next thing we're going to add is some salt-free Creole seasoning from All You Can Spice. So yeah, our Creole seasoning is salt-free, so you can add as much flavor to a dish without increasing the salt content. All of our seasonings are all natural. There's no silicon dioxide, no MSG, no chemical additives, and there's no gluten. For some reason, a lot of seasonings have flour in them as a cheap filler. So we are gluten-free. All right, the ingredients. We've got paprika, garlic powder, onion powder, guajillo chili, white pepper, black pepper, and rice concentrate, which is what we use to prevent caking instead of silicon dioxide, basil, oregano, celery seed, and thyme. Okay, our red beans have begun to boil, and if you see all these bubbles on the top, my grandma always called that the scum. It may be, the fat off the pickled pork or whatever, but I know she and a lot of other cooks like to scrape it off. So that's what we're going to do, right? You want to try to get just the scum and not the juices, right? Then you can put them in a bowl. Okay, just to be efficient, I added the kosher salt, 1 teaspoon, to my salt-free Creole seasoning. We're going to add both of them together at the same time, right? Once our beans are boiling. And then you're going to want to stir that up real well. And once again, depending on how much stock you decide to put and whatever ingredients you decide to put, you might need more. I might add another tablespoon of seasoning. We'll just see how it goes, right? Depending on the color of the broth and the taste. And like I said before, the salt, we can always add extra salt at the end if need be after we taste it, but a lot of these ingredients are going to add a salty flavor, and it's hard to take salt out of a dish, but you can always add it at the end. And this is really it. You add all that, and then we're going to cook this bad boy for at least an hour. The only thing we have left to do is cook some rice and add some parsley towards the last 30 minutes or so of cooking. Speaking of which, I should have gotten the parsley when there was daylight. I have it in my garden, but it'll be dark. And we're going to keep this baby on high, right, a high boil, for at least 30 minutes. Then after 30 minutes, we are going to lower the heat to about medium, and we're going to cover it with the top about halfway, so that the heat stays in the pot, but it does vent a little bit. And some of this liquid will evaporate, which will give the dish more flavor. And then you gotta get down by the pot and smell. If it makes you do that, it's starting to taste good. I'm gonna go through and do a round, getting some of this scum off the top. All right, let's go outside in the dark and get some parsley. Hey, Pops, you wanna go potty? What, y'all ready? Y'all ready? Are you ready? Oh my God. Oh, let's go, go, go. And then we're gonna pick some of this parsley. And just like that, we have some fresh, delicious, smells really good parsley. If any of you have the ability to garden, if you have a yard or if you have some window space, growing parsley is, one of the easier things to grow. And sometimes, depending on the climate, here in South Louisiana, this is, new parsley, but I've grown parsley, the same plant, for 2 years before. A lot of times they might be better tasting, or they might grow better if you grow a new one every year. But we had a mild winter one time, and I had a parsley plant that was 2 years old, and it still produced some delicious stuff. We're gonna go ahead and do another run, getting off this scum. And of course, while it's boiling, right, every once in a while, you should give a good stir. Alright y'all, it has been 30 minutes of boiling these babies on high. So we're going to go ahead and turn the heat down to medium-low. We're going to give it a quick stir. Look how much the water level has gone down. You can see it's starting to get creamier. And just keep an eye on that water level. I might have to add a little bit in a few minutes, but right now we're looking okay. Because we don't want to add too much water and then the beans be all watery, right? We want them to be creamy. And then you are going, at least this is what I've always done, put your pot on and you leave a little area to vent. So it allows the pot to stay hot, but it allows some of that water to evaporate, which once again will make your beans creamier and it'll give them more flavor. So this is what you want. You just want kind of a simmer, right? But on a big pot or a thick pot, you can't put the burner on simmer. It depends on the burner you have, but on mine I need to put it at medium-low if I want it to simmer. So you just want a little bit of bubbles, and then you're gonna cover it up. You're gonna come back and you have to keep checking on it. You have to stir it, make sure it doesn't burn, stick to the bottom. We should be doing this about at least an hour. We're going to check it after an hour and see where the beans are, see if they're fully cooked. And once they are and breaking down a bit, then we can mush them up to make this red beans and rice extra creamy. It's about 20 minutes after we put it to simmer, so let's give it a quick stir. You can see it's getting thicker. Looking good on the water level for now. Okay, the beans have been simmering about 50 minutes, so we're going to give them another stir, see how they're doing. The water level still seems good. They're getting creamier. And now it's going to be a good time to add our parsley, which you're going to pick the leaves off, right? Pick them off the stem, and then we're going to chop it up. So like usual, I done picked too much parsley. I don't need this, but I can either stick this in some water and then cover it with a Ziploc bag and put it in the refrigerator to keep it fresh for over a week, or you can dry it, chop it up, and then make sure it's dry once again and put it in the freezer. So this is about how much parsley I'm going to want to use. I'll let you know how much it is once I measure it out. And voila, it is minced. All right, yeah, I think I said chopped earlier. Gonna want to mince that parsley. All right, let's see how much we're gonna add. Okay, I ended up measuring out 2 tablespoons of the parsley. So we'll add that and see how it goes. And you are going to want to add the parsley within the last 20 to 30 minutes of cooking. I don't like to add fresh herbs like parsley or cilantro until the end of cooking, because if you add them too early, you don't taste that fresh flavor as much. Alright, you think we're good? I think so. And sometimes I like to add just a little bit of white vinegar, or depending on the dish, different types of vinegar. But red beans and rice, I'll add just a little bit of white vinegar to give it some acidity. Okay, just a little bit. Alright, and then I am going to put my top back on the beans because my water level is kind of low. It's good, it's nice and creamy, so I like it, but I don't want any more water to evaporate. So these last 15-20 minutes or so, I'm going to have the top back on. The parsley has been in the beans for about 30 minutes, so we are going to have a little taste test. And I usually will take out about a cup of beans and then I'll mush them together, either with a spoon against the side of the cup or whisk a fork around. But I don't know, y'all, these beans are pretty creamy, and sometimes that happens, just depending on or how much you boil them. Oops. That's our rice timer. How much you boil them, how long they simmer, yada yada. So, I mean, they look pretty creamy. I'm liking that consistency, so we'll go ahead and try them. Oh, good. All right, y'all. I just taste tested it, which you should always do with your food. You gotta taste it to see if you need to add anything. And this time I didn't need to add anything. Didn't need any extra salt. We ended up not needing to add any water to it, and it didn't need any more seasoning. It's pretty perfect. All right, y'all, so thanks for watching, and hopefully now you know one way to cook some traditional Creole red beans and rice.